When the police arrive at that house in Dickens Avenue, they step into a scene, frankly, of chaos and carnage.
4 people were seriously injured in what appeared to be a brutal knife attack.
They are confronted by a bloody, horrific scene. There is a man who is cradling his own guts that have spilled from his stomach after being stabbed.
2 or 3 people at least on the floor, bleeding heavily, unconscious, unresponsive.
Simon Gurecki had life-threatening wounds and was given CPR.
Also, a woman is critically injured.
Natasha Sadler-Ellis had been stabbed in the heart.
The floor is covered in blood, the walls are covered in blood splashes. You've got people fighting for their lives.
Both Simon and Natasha died at the scene.
This was a sustained, brutal, out-of-control attack.
Simon Gurecki was a happily married man with 2 children.
Simon was quite stocky, quite muscly, very short. He just made me laugh the moment I met him. He just broke out with a joke, which made me laugh, and I thought, I quite like this geezer. And then we become friends after that. We just had so much in common. We liked the same clothes, sports with mad on football, both of us, even though he was West Ham and I'm Chelsea. We will watch England together. I suffered with depression and anxiety. Simon used to say, if you ever need someone to talk to or need me, I'm there, and I said the same thing. If I had something on my mind, or I was down, and say, right, come, we'll go for a chat, coffee, a walk, and yeah, he used to sort me out, and I just feel a lot better after.
He owned a thriving fishmongery business at a Canterbury food hall.
He knew everything about the fish, he knew what dishes to serve the fish with. He was very, very knowledgeable, and he was a good cook himself.
When it comes to quality, I don't think I can be beaten, not buying in the supermarkets for sure.
Around about 2014, Simon's business started to struggle a little bit with finances and stuff. He used to get quite frustrated when people weren't paying their bills. People coming in there saying, it's a bit cheaper in Sainsbury's, can you do me a deal? And that sort of things used to stress him out. He used to think people were taking the mickey, put a lot of strain on his relationship. And then it fell apart, his relationship fell apart because he couldn't cope no more at home and that with having no money, and it caused him many arguments.
Dean and his wife Tara took Simon in for a few months. But when their son returned home, Simon, not wanting to be a burden, found a new place to live.
Simon called me one day to say he's found a new place in Dickens Avenue, a shared accommodation with 3 other blokes. So I said, that's great. I said, do you need a hand moving in? He said, yes, please. So I went and picked up his stuff with him, which was a couple of boxes and a couple of black bags. So I was quite shocked at that.
The house at Dickens Avenue belonged to a housing association, and it was a multiple occupancy property. You know, it was a place that had been divided into kind of little flatlets where you had 4 separate rooms where people were living and sleeping, but there was things like shared lavatory and shared bathroom facilities there.
It wasn't a very nice place. I didn't like it from the beginning. Just as I walked through the door, you could see it's like a hostel place. It wasn't very clean, it wasn't very nice at all. And I went into his room and I was quite shocked. It's just a little box room, smallest room in the house. And he kept going, no, I'll be fine, bruv, I'll be fine, it'll be all right. And I sat in my car after and I cried. I rang Tara and I cried because I just couldn't believe how he had a home, business, wife and children, and then he's back down to having nothing. And that was really sad, and it was hard to take.
Simon picked up work in a restaurant kitchen and took on some building jobs, but nothing lasted. And he began to find it a strain living in the house share.
I could see he was struggling. The laughable Simon wasn't the same. He'd tell the odd joke, but it's like you had to force it out of him, and that's when I knew he was down in the dumps and it was a problem.
In 2016, a chance encounter in the park shifted his life in a new direction when he met Natasha Sadler-Ellis.
Everyone certainly around where she was born in Margate knows of Natasha, and she definitely would have the most fun. But Natasha was very headstrong. I think if she wanted to do something, she would do it. She was my role model from day dot and quite endearing.
Natasha was laid back. She loved, you know, just chilling out with friends, family, but all together.
She'd always be well presented. You know, she wouldn't go out without her hair and makeup done. But yeah, she was very much like her own style.
Natasha settled in Canterbury and while raising 3 children, studied philosophy at university.
Natasha's always been a very bright girl. She's done really well at school. She decided that she was going to go to university. All she kept going on about is, I'm nearly 40. I've got to settle down.
I got a text from Simon saying he's met this new girl and he really, really likes her. Then I see him a few days later and he's all like really smartly dressed and he looked really good. A lot better, a lot healthier. And I said, good luck to you. And I said, you look really happy.
Natasha and Simon shared similar taste in music. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Oasis, massive Oasis fan. I believe Simon likes that as well.
They were practically neighbours, with Simon's house share just around the corner from where Natasha lived with her sons.
She said she needed some decorating doing. Did I know anyone? I said, yeah, I know a couple of people who can do it, and I'll get back to you. The next day she phoned me and said, oh, don't worry about that, I've got someone to do it. I said, oh, who's that guy? Oh, Simon. I'm friends with Simon. I've never heard of Simon to this point. I said, oh, who's he? I was just friends, you know, really, really nice. He said he's going to do it whilst we're going to be singing a bit of Oasis. So she loved Oasis.
While Simon's life was on the up, the atmosphere in his house share was far from harmonious. Mainly due to its longest-standing resident, Foster Christian.
Foster Christian is in his 50s. He has been living in this social accommodation house share for around 7 years and has kind of seen himself now as the top dog of this house. He is in and out of work as a mechanic, and he's a bit of a loner. He doesn't have a large friendship group, and so I think that's why for Foster Christian this house share and his dominance and status within it is so important, because that is a significant part of his life, really.
He, quite frankly, thought that he ruled the roost and that everybody else should fall in line with what he wanted them to do rather than what they wanted to do.
Simon Gorecki was also a man who was, shall we say, he was quite loud. He was a bit of a vivid character, possibly a little argumentative. And I think that the situation in the house at Dickens Avenue was a little bit of a pressure cooker.
In Canterbury, after a tough few years, Simon Gorecki had found some happiness with new friend Natasha Sadler-Ellis. But his living situation was becoming toxic.
He's quite tidy, Simon, in certain ways, cleanliness. He'd tidy the kitchen up, come back 10, 15 minutes later after Foster Christian had been in there, and it was a mess. Foster Christian had a bike, for example, and he'd come in and he'd put it in the front room and lean it on the settee. And that used to wind Simon up, because he'd say, you know, don't park bikes in here, you put your bike out the back or in the hallway. But he used to do it to get a reaction from Simon.
Simon's already dealing with a difficult situation in life. On top of that, he's dealing with Foster, who's being quite aggressive in that. And so I think it's all just building up to be this real tension point between all of the housemates.
Simon would ring me up, fuming down the phone, saying that it's getting worse in the house. They're clashing nearly every day, bumping into each other in the kitchen, they'd push each other and shove. And I even said to him, you need to get out of there, just move out, get out. And like Simon said, why should I be the one to move out? And I've got nowhere to go at the moment.
I mean, to put it in plain terms, the situation at Dickens Avenue was building up to being a tinderbox.
it could become very volatile, a hostile environment. There was a lot of intimidation that went on.
There was a particular housemate, you know, he thought it was his house. If he wants to do something, he's doing it. Somebody else could be cooking, he'd come in, right, you need to finish that, I'm doing this. And he was a bully. And he was very confrontational.
The situation appears to have been that Foster Christian and Simon Gorecki were sparking off each other. It didn't necessarily always boil over into a violent confrontation, but clearly words were being spoken and neither man liked the other.
Foster Christian was known as a serial complainer and had written to his housing association and MP asking to be moved, but remained in the house.
Simon Gorecki had a shopping expedition with Natasha. They both liked to have a drink. In the early evening, about 7 p.m, they went back to Dickens Avenue, where Simon said to Natasha, I'm going to have a shower.
Foster Christian goes into the kitchen and runs the tap, which alters the temperature of the water in the shower dramatically.
Simon came out and confronted Foster about this situation, and an abusive argument started between the two men. Because there was ongoing tension, ongoing friction, it just escalated quite quickly into a shouty argument with, you know, accusations and unpleasantness going backwards and forwards. And Natasha gets in touch with her eldest boy. As he's FaceTiming his mum on Facebook Messenger, he can see and hear an escalating row going on between Simon Gorecki and Foster Christian in the background, and he thinks, gosh, this is really, really nasty, and his instinct is to get round to his mother's side because he thinks she's in jeopardy and he wants to get round there and defend her.
Natasha met her son along with his younger brother at the door, but the argument was left unresolved.
Foster Christian heads towards his room and everyone thinks this might be the end of this argument. But before he closes the door, he shouts some abuse at Natasha, which leads her to following up the stairs towards him, followed by Simon and her sons. There's already this underlying tension and aggression happening within the household. So whilst it might only be one small incident, it's the culmination of things that has basically led to this being the straw that broke the camel's back.
At 7:40, police received a 999 call.
Can please have emergency?
Yeah, I've just been attacked in my house.
So who's assaulted you?
Well, one of my housemates, Simon, and his girlfriend and these boys. These people are still here as well.
Okay. How have they attacked you?
They was hitting me with beer cans and bottles. So I just grabbed the knife from my rack. And they were still doing it. They was just baiting me and beating me and beating me.
Okay. So you mentioned of a knife. Is the knife still on you?
The subject of a knife gets introduced, and you can hear, and I've no doubt she's an experienced police operator, that she's saying, you didn't mention anything about a knife before, now you're talking about a knife.
Yeah, I've still got it here, yeah. It's one of my kitchen knives. I just grabbed that quick.
Okay, and have you used it?
Well, yes, I have used it, I think, yes.
You think?
Yes, I have used it. Yes.
I get the clear indication, it's just as little nuances in there, little changes in her voice tone and so forth, that she's thinking, I see, so now there's people injured. I don't like the sound of this at all.
Okay, who did you use the knife on?
All of them are attacking me. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's absolutely fine. I have to ask you. Sorry.
Is the police coming?
Yep.
Is the police coming? Okay.
Yep, we're coming, and then there's an ambulance coming as well.
His approach to this is, I'm a victim, I'm calling you, I need the help of the police here, I'm frightened and I'm under attack.
But they just grabbed it back. They've grabbed it back.
Okay. And do you know which one's taking it back?
I don't know.
No.
Oh.
When the police arrive at that house, they're then confronted with a horrific scene. 2 or 3 people at least on the floor.
The primary concerns of the police officers is to protect life. So that means rendering first aid, but also, is there somebody armed with a knife that we need to track down so that nobody else can be hurt?
So have you got the knife on?
I'm on the operators, yeah. Yeah, the police are there now.
Yeah, okay, I'll take the line with the Foster, okay? Thank you.
I don't know, one of them's got the knife. One of them has got the knife. I grabbed it off of them. One of them's got it. I'll talk to him.
On the ground outside is Natasha's 16-year-old son, who is cradling his own guts after being stabbed. When they go into the kitchen, Simon Gorecki is being given CPR by Natasha's elder son. Natasha is critically injured.
Foster Christian is there. Everybody's covered in blood. The walls are covered in blood. The floors are awash with blood.
From the 999 call, police knew a knife was involved, but they needed to explore all options.
They can't make any assumptions at this point. They don't know who's done what to who in these first critical moments. And now the crime scene is the scene of intense police activity.
The bottom line is, you have to establish the truth.
The first investigators on the scene will be saying, a big knife has been used here, and they're looking, and everybody's looking around saying, well, it's not here.
Finding the knife was critical to the inquiry.
I kept hearing and seeing ambulances going by and police cars. I text Simon to say to him, I hope you're all right, but I seen no police cars going up towards your way. Can you please let me know if everything's all right? And that's when I knew something was wrong, because I hadn't heard nothing from him.
Day of the 29th, that was a Tuesday. Every Tuesday, me and some of my mates, we used to go and play five-a-side.
As soon as I heard the voice on the end of the phone, I instantly knew something was wrong.
We got back, it was probably about 8:15, and I had a call from my partner. And she didn't say hello, she just said, you need to come back now.
He explained to me that it was Tasha's eldest son, and her 16-year-old had been in an accident. It just weren't sinking in. You know, I was just like, what is going on? I phoned Jodie. I couldn't speak. I was crying. I couldn't even get my words out properly.
I just remember phoning the hospital. The receptionist actually put me onto the place, and I said, how's the eldest nephew? He's okay, he's being stitched up. He's okay. How's the 16-year-old nephew? And there was a pause, and they were like, he's in emergency surgery. We don't know if he's going to make it.
Natasha Sadler-Ellis's family were devastated to learn that 2 of her children were involved in a stabbing incident, which left her 16-year-old son with life-threatening injuries.
I was like, straight away, where's Tasha? Where's my sister? What's she doing? Oh my God, she's going to need me there. I need to go and see her, make sure that, you know, I need to be with her. And he said she didn't make it. And when you hear that, because Natasha being Natasha, it's unthinkable. You can't even imagine it at that time that, you know, your sister didn't make it. And I just didn't have no words.
I phoned Jodie, and then in the background I hear screaming, I hear Jodie crying, I hear my partner crying, and Jodie says she's not here. She's not here anymore, she's died. I suppose there's a part of me at that point that thinks, no, they've mixed up. No, she's fine. Of course she's fine. It's Tasha.
Stephen, Jodie and their mum rushed to the hospital, while Cheryl embarked on a 5-hour drive from Sheffield.
The journey there, 45 minutes, there's not any speaking going on at all. It's just a state of disbelief. So many questions. We get to the hospital, and Natasha's son, the words I was told to describe his condition was, when he was found, he was on the floor with his guts hanging out, physically holding them in, which is quite a traumatic image to paint of a 16-year-old boy.
At that time we just knew that he was literally in a life or death situation.
Tara got a news flash on her phone to say there'd been an incident up Dickens Avenue. There was police there, and you could see it was outside Simon's house. Later on that day, when Simon's wife phoned me to tell me that it was Simon that had been killed, I couldn't think straight. I just kept thinking, what's going on? I couldn't really speak. It was a really sad day. Really sad.
At the crime scene, police and forensic teams scrutinised Foster Christian's self-defence claims and compared them with the physical evidence.
The most pressing and important thing to do is to preserve that crime scene, because after it's been examined, photographed, gone over in minute detail, it will give up its secrets.
Foster says that this brawl has taken place in his room, and yet when the police have a look at his room, they discover that he's a very tidy man and the room is actually in immaculately good order.
Examining the blood distribution helped detectives reconstruct the sequence of events.
There is blood on several surfaces on the landing, but there's relatively no blood at all in Foster Christian's room. The blood spatter analysis indicated that in fact the attack had started outside the bedroom, within the doorway and on the landing. So already that cast doubt on the validity of the account provided by the assailant.
Foster Christian was under interrogation at the station.
In a situation like this, where it would appear that what the suspect is telling the detectives is not what the crime scene would appear to be telling them, then it's really important to test what that person is saying.
The suspect's calm demeanour suddenly changed.
He was getting angry and started verbally abusing the detectives, and then began to accuse the police officers who were interviewing him of being racist.
Autopsies on Natasha and Simon provided crucial insight into the attack.
In Simon's case, there are several stab wounds on the back which seem to go in a pattern to indicate that Simon Greco was going down the stairs. So they start low on his back and they work their way up, which would indicate that he is going lower and lower down the stairs as he is being continually attacked. One of the wounds enters into his chest and punches his lung, and this would represent the cause of his death. Because the ribs have been injured in this case would indicate the level of force has been severe. These haven't been caused to him by someone just merely trying to protect themselves.
The knife blows inflicted on Natasha were inflicted with extreme prejudice. These were not defensive blows. These were aggressive, delivered with huge amount of power and malevolence, clearly. A knife blow was brought down to her head and the blade passed in a downward trajectory, just to the side of her eye socket into her temple, and then right down through the inside of her face into her jaw. The killer has then plunged it into her chest, and the knife had a long blade and it was quite a broad blade as well, and essentially instantly did irreparable damage. The police were able to work out that the amount of stabbing that had gone on, this was a sustained attack. It was not a defensive get back. This was somebody who'd lost control completely.
The ferocity of the attack contrasted with the injuries on Foster Christian.
Foster Christian, who always claims to be a victim, said in that call that they beat him and beat him and beat him, and yet he only has one small wound. If he'd been subjected to such a vicious beating by 4 people, he would of course have had many, many wounds.
As media interest in the case intensified, security was tightened at the hospital where Natasha's son was recovering from surgery.
I was in the room with Jodie when Natasha's son woke up. The first thing he's done was he looked at me, grabbed my head, I guess to make sure I'm real. And then the first thing he said to me and Jodie was, is Mum okay? That was really hard, that moment.
I didn't even know what words to use, and I just used the words that was told to me. Unfortunately, your mum hasn't made it. And he just looked the other way and started crying. And he said, I already knew. I already knew. When a child has been near enough murdered themselves and they wake up to hear that their mum's no longer with them, they've just completely lost everything, haven't they?
Immediately after the incident, police conducted an intensive search of the house and surrounding area, looking for the murder weapon.
The knife remains a mystery. The police haven't found it, and Foster Christian can't explain away where it's gone to. He maintains that it was last in the possession of the people that were attacking him. But none of those people left the scene. They were all injured. They all needed paramedics to attend to them. So that question remained, where was the knife?
Foster Christian didn't have the opportunity to leave that house to get rid of the murder weapon, and he certainly could have travelled very far if he did.
Then a breakthrough came, as police uncovered critical evidence.
There were other people at the crime scene when the police first turned up, but of course they had so much to do that their primary concern were the victims, and was there somebody that presented a danger. Among these people was a friend of Foster Christian's, a woman called Naomi Toro. When the police got to the scene, she was seen acting rather suspiciously, and she disappeared.
Police brought Naomi Toro in for questioning.
Naomi Toro tells police that she received a call from Foster Christian on the night of the attack, and she went to the house with her friend in the car. Naomi stepped over the bodies of the people who were lying there dying, went and collected the knife, and left.
Detectives interrogated the women, intent on locating the knife and determining whose fingerprints and DNA might be on it.
Naomi Toro said, I've taken the knife and I've hidden it. And they said, well, what have you done with it? Where have you hidden it? And she said, well, I went to Fordwich. There's a bridge over the River Stour there, and I've thrown it over the bridge into the river. So the police put divers into the river straight away, and it's a nice kind of clear flowing river there, not very deep, and it didn't take the police divers long to find the murder weapon.
However, having been submerged in water, no DNA could be collected. By now, detectives had more than just physical evidence. They had interview statements.
There are 2 surviving eyewitnesses to these crimes. which are Natasha's two boys. They, of course, can give first-hand testimony about what they heard, what they saw.
With mounting evidence, including the 999 call, Foster Christian was formally charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of GBH.
Who's assaulted you?
Well, one of the, my housemates, Simon, and his girlfriend and these boys.
How have they attacked you?
They just come to my door and then just started lashing into me. But they was hitting me with beer cans and bottles.
He sounds fake. There's some kind of breathing that he puts on. And to me, it's just an act. He's trying to cover his tracks.
Is the knife still on you?
Yeah, I've still got it here, yeah.
Have you used it?
Well, yes, I have used it, I think, yes.
You think?
Yes, I have used it. Yes.
Who did you use the knife on?
All of them are attacking me. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
He's suggesting that he's been attacked by a large group and that, yes, he's used a knife, but purely to defend himself. Foster Christian is quite intentionally still curating this victim narrative, positioning himself as almost the weaker party.
But they just grabbed it back. They've grabbed it back.
Do you know which one's taking it back?
I don't know.
No.
He's not telling anywhere near the actual truth. He's not saying, I've got 4 people lying at my feet right now with multiple stab wounds.
Despite the evidence, it was unclear whether Foster Christian would plead guilty. 7 days after the murders, Foster Christian's plea hearing was held at Maidstone Crown Court.
We waited for Foster Christian to come up from the cells.
The courtroom was packed as Foster Christian arrived.
When the family appeared in court in the public gallery, he turned to them and openly derided them in front of the jury, giving a sarcastic clap and saying, "Oh, you've had a very good turnout."
All the way through that, he was just looking over, clapping and smiling and waving, and that made us feel really crap. I mean, I was getting angry, the families were both getting upset, and poor Natasha's mum was really upset. She was really crying. It was awful to see.
Foster Christian isn't showing any signs of remorse. Despite having caused so much damage and harm, this really strikes as someone who's showing significant narcissistic tendencies.
The courtroom awaited his plea.
In my head, I'm thinking, you know, this is clear cut. He's been arrested, he's been charged. There's no doubt here, surely. And then he pleads not guilty.
At the start of the trial, the 12 men of the jury were sworn in.
The defence opening statement was Natasha and Simon had started bullying him. So Foster ran upstairs into his room and they've chased him and he was scared for his life. I just felt sick.
One of the key elements of the prosecution's case was Natasha's son's testimony. The 16-year-old, sufficiently recovered, gave it via video link.
He said that him and his brother had gone to the house to remove their mother from the scene. However, Foster Christian started hurling abuse at Natasha. She had then proceeded to go up the stairs, where Foster Christian began to get physical. When her eldest tried to intervene, Foster Christian punched him. And so Natasha's 16-year-old son steps in and punches Foster Christian in retaliation. It was at that point that Foster Christian had pulled out a knife covered in a plastic bag and stabbed Natasha's youngest son. When he was asked if he saw anyone other than Foster Christian with a knife, he said, "No, of course not."
He got to a point where he got very upset. He was a child. The defence lawyer was trying to cross-examine him like an adult.
This is a young person who's not only lost their mother, but has also themselves received significant injuries. And you can't imagine the level of trauma that just reliving this experience must have put upon him.
I couldn't be more prouder of him in that moment, because he did not let him bring him down. He sat there, he told the truth, and he didn't waver.
Foster Christian maintained he acted in self-defence. The judge asked him to demonstrate his actions.
Foster Christian has said that in regards to Simon Gorecki's death, that he got him in a headlock.
He claimed he punched out in different directions and was not aware he had used a knife.
The likelihood is that these wounds were caused as Simon Gorecki was running away from Foster, going down the stairs, and therefore he had his back to Foster Christian when he was causing these injuries. That isn't the type of injury that you see in cases of self-defence. This was an absolutely pivotal part of this case because it was clear that there was a mismatch between what he was saying and what the pathology was demonstrating.
He denies all the charges. He says that this was an act of self-defence. He didn't intend to kill or wound anybody. He was fighting for his own life.
He was able to stab to death a man in his back as he ran away. Where's the self-defence in that? A woman that was a lot smaller than him. A child. What kind of man is this?
It was revealed to the jury that Foster Christian had a history of violent offences and had been jailed several times over the past 3 decades.
He's previously had an argument with a doorman at a nightclub, which ended up with the doorman being stabbed in the back with a screwdriver. He's been in a road rage incident where he's gone to court and threatened a witness against him in the court premises with an axe. In another episode, he's confronted and tried to stab football fans in Deptford in South London with a lock knife. So he's a man with a clear and present propensity towards extreme violence.
That's when we realised that Simon was living with an absolute maniac and he should never have been in that house. That's what we didn't know, no one knew. That's the most scary thing about it, the fact that he was living with a crazy person.
The prosecution presented further evidence challenging Foster Christian's claims of self-defence.
There was a police evidence tape that said, I took a knife from my room. Then you had a comprehensive, really, basket of scientific evidence from the police about the mechanics of the murder scene. These were brutal, brutal stab wounds, clearly intended to do huge damage. Then, of course, you have the evidence that was given by Naomi Toro, the person that the police had actually seen at the murder scene because she'd been called there by Foster to get rid of the knife.
There's always a worry the jury can go either way. In your head, you're thinking it's 100% he's guilty. You never know who's going to be sitting in the jury and what decision they're going to take within that room.
Foster Christian was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years before being eligible for parole. Naomi Toro and the woman who drove with her to the scene pleaded guilty to assisting an offender. Toro was jailed for 12 months.
Clearly, the judge could see that it was not safe for a man like Foster Christian to be allowed back into public circulation again.
Court settles down a bit, and before he gets led away, he smiles again at everyone in the public gallery, which is full, and he sticks his middle finger up at everyone and turns his back and walks off. No remorse whatsoever at all.
I was happy he got the time. I was very sad that we lost Simon and Tasha, and I was angry at the same time the fact that he should have been dealt with years ago. He should never have been in the property with 3 other men or anyone because the man was an animal.
The sentence brought some closure. But life would never be the same for Simon and Natasha's friends and family.
She loved it here, didn't she? I always put flowers here every year on her birthday. It's hard, it is hard. We can't turn the clock back, nobody can.
It's a nice place to be, and a bit of a vocal point, quite poignant. It's Central Margate, where Natasha's from, and a place to remember.
The impact as a whole is that every day is a challenge still. Time moves on. People move on with their lives. We're just stuck.
I kind of see it as, you know, kind of being a hole in my heart, but it won't repair. I've just got to kind of manage it around it.
I've not got that person I could go to anymore. He was my rock. I'd go to him for anything. And he could bring me back, bounce up and down, make me laugh, do anything. And that's what I miss. I've got mates, but I still don't have that laugh like I did with him. That special bond's gone.
Tonight, I go back home to Georgia to look into the death of a young wife.
That Atlanta wife murdered as she opened her very own front door. An all-new 2020 starts right now.
This is a true murder mystery. Emphasis on murder, emphasis on mystery.
I felt like Lita's murder case looks like a true crime story, but it goes a lot deeper.
Who would kill this woman? She wasn't robbed. Somebody came to the door with roses and shot her dead.
Was there a feeling that this had to be pretty calculated?
She was shot with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun.
No obvious suspect.
Was she at all concerned about the fact that she was in an interracial marriage and that this was a difficult time in the South?
It was not a welcoming place for a black woman to live.
She said, I'm done. I'm packing up my stuff.
I want you to see the puzzle. When I put it together and I show it to you, you'll never forget it.
Your wife's best friend has been murdered, and police are looking at you. It's a chilly, drizzly winter Atlanta morning, and 35-year-old Lita McClinton is suddenly awakened.
It's around 8:15 in the morning, and she heard the doorbell ring. And she tightens up her rope and goes downstairs to open the door.
And I think she was probably not going to open it, but she looked through the keyhole and saw that the person had a box of flowers.
There was a man standing at the door, holding a long white box of long stem roses that had a big, thick pink ribbon around it.
So she receives the flowers, thinking that this is a delivery.
She was really excited. She thought that it was a gift from one of her friends.
In a sea of red brick townhouses, Lita's white one stands out. Her best friend Poppy and 3-year-old daughter have spent the night, and they are still in bed upstairs, just waking up.
Poppy hears her say, "Good morning," to the man at the door.
The flower delivery man produces a handgun. He fires a shot.
She actually put the box of roses in front of her face. The second shot went right through the center of her head, and she fell with a large thud.
Lita's friend Poppy was upstairs with her toddler, and right away she grabbed her daughter and hid her into a closet and said, "You gotta be quiet as a mouse." She didn't know if the gunman was gonna come for her. Lita's neighbor hears the shots, then sees the guy running like a bat out of hell, just booking it out of the complex, and he calls 911.
The first police officer is only a few blocks away, and he gets the call, and so that police officer ends up holding Lita's hand. They thought Lita was completely unconscious, and yet she managed to squeeze his hand as he kept comforting her and telling her everything was going to be okay. And he said it was her comforting him. Poppy got out of the closet and called Lita's mother, and she couldn't get words out, and she finally just said, "Lita's been shot." Lita's mother called her husband. When they went to the hospital, they were put in a a separate little waiting room. The doctor tended to Lita. And he came out about 30 minutes later and said, "I'm sorry."
Never get easier because she's gone. We should have gone first, not her.
Atlanta's exclusive Buckhead neighborhood is known for its sprawling mansions, not murder. So when the shooting happened right here, neighbors were shocked and on edge.
Sullivan was found in the doorway of her townhouse, shot twice in the head.
It's pretty surprising that in this area, those kinds of things probably wouldn't happen.
How did you learn that Lita had been killed?
I ran to the TV because I heard Sullivan on Slayton Drive.
Police say a box of roses was found near her body. The gunman apparently posed as a delivery man.
And I said, "Oh my God, that's Lita."
Detectives on the scene found a bullet fragment, 2 shell casings, and the box of roses.
2 gunshots from a 9mm penetrated the box. The weapon was never found. To this day, it's never been found.
In this case, you had just a minor amount of evidence.
At the time, it was the top story on the news, and law enforcement officers felt a great deal of pressure in order to bring Lita's killer to justice.
For years, Lita's case was cold, buried underneath the weight of unanswered questions and fading memories.
I'm Deb Miller-Landau, and I just wrote a book called A Devil Went Down to Georgia about the murder of Lita McClinton Sullivan. I covered this story for Atlanta Magazine back in 2004, and the more people I talked to, the more that I researched, the more I felt like I began to know Lita. So talking about the day that she died feels personal.
The case was also personal to Clint Rucker, the prosecutor. When I came to Atlanta to meet up with him, I learned that one of his passions is puzzles. Working from the outside in, which also translates to solving homicides.
Where do you begin? How do you start to connect?
When I'm putting together a puzzle, not only in real life, but also a murder case, I make an assessment about what it is I'm working with. I start to identify pieces of the puzzle that are foundational.
Lita's murder case looks like a true crime story, but it goes a lot deeper. It's a story about love and loss and greed.
Lita had been reared in Atlanta's black elite.
On the surface, she was living an Atlanta dream.
A prosperous upbringing.
A very prosperous upbringing. The expectations for her life were pretty high.
Black women have had to be exceptional in order to be seen. And that was the case then, and I think it's still the case now.
One thing seems certain, a murder of this kind is personal.
Was there a feeling that this had to be pretty calculated?
Police knew almost immediately Lita Sullivan was the intended victim.
Who would kill this woman? She wasn't robbed. Somebody came to the door with roses and shot her dead.
Atlanta had its fair share of crime, but this was most certainly one of the highest profile cases that got reported in the news.
Sullivan was shot twice in the head. A box of roses found next to her body.
Using a flower delivery man and shooting her, it was something that just kind of stuck out to me.
Atlanta, Georgia, billed as a vibrant melting pot, a destination for creatives. But if you grew up in Georgia in the 1970s, as I did, you know this was a very different place then. One still emerging from the dark shadows of segregation and racial tensions.
What was 1970s Atlanta like when she was sort of coming along?
We've got African Americans that are kind of ascending into really prominent positions. Lita also is ascending because her parents are part of this movement.
Lita's parents, Emory and Joanne McClinton, were both power players, movers and shakers in Atlanta.
Emory McClinton was on the State Board of Transportation. Joanne McClinton was a member of the Georgia legislature.
Joanne will tell you stories about being in really interpersonal meetings with Dr. King.
She was Maynard Jackson's campaign manager when he ran for mayor.
I think the McClintons had high expectations for who Lita would become. Lita Sullivan was a true daughter of Atlanta.
She was just a gem, very, very proper.
And she had grown up in a world of cotillions, so she really was sort of that classic upper crust black person growing up in Atlanta.
She knew where she was going.
She had a great sense of style.
And absolutely charming.
After high school, she went on to Spelman College. Her parents sort of hoped that she would enter the political arena like they were, but she was very much into fashion. She was working at a boutique at Lenox Square, and in walks this guy who had unruly curls and weird glasses and just immediately saw Lita and was taken with her.
Fresh out of college, 24-year-old Lita is smitten with James, Jim Sullivan. He's a bit older, 35, and he's also white.
He showered her with gifts. He just completely showered her with attention.
He comes in, he dazzles her. What did you learn about him?
I learned that what he saw was a fantasy in Lita. I think he looked at her as a young, very attractive, very smart African-American female.
Another big difference between them is class. Lita has been raised in Atlanta's high society and Jim on Boston's gritty South Side.
He grew up in a very middle to lower middle class environment.
He went to Holy Cross College, got a bachelor's degree in economics.
He always wanted more for himself. He always wanted to be a rich person, but it didn't seem like that was in the cards. He was an accountant. He was working hard, but he really wasn't getting ahead.
But life is about to change for Jim Sullivan when he inherits a thriving liquor distributorship from his uncle, worth millions of dollars.
Crown Beverages was worth around $3.2 million. Jim had become a wealthy man. So when the McClintons met Jim for the first time, they were like, who is this guy? He had this kind of manner that was very uncouth and brash, and they were sort of mystified about what their daughter saw in him. I mean, I think the only thing they had in common was that he was Catholic and they were Catholic as well. But everything else was complete polar opposites.
Another concern, of course, was race. Remember, this is the 70s. Even though the country is watching color barriers slipping away on the hit show The Jeffersons, with Primetime's first interracial couple.
Your parents have never gotten over the fact that I'm white.
That's because you never got over being white.
At that time, this was unusual.
Georgia's anti-miscegenation laws that forbade blacks and whites to marry had only been repealed 10 years earlier.
Still, despite their obvious differences, Jim Sullivan pops the question to Lita.
So the McClintons were like, you cannot marry this man.
They felt like Lita was really making a mistake and was kind of caught up in the exuberance of this relationship.
Despite her parents' strong objections, Lita and Jim are engaged. But on the eve of her wedding, Jim drops a bomb.
He tells Lita that he has been married before and that he has 4 children. Lita was shocked.
And then, the very same night, Jim Sullivan blindsides his bride-to-be again.
He whips out a piece of paper and he says, "Can you sign this?" And then she looks down and sees that he's drawn up a prenuptial agreement. And she's like, "What is this?"
Apparently determined to protect his newfound wealth, Sullivan surprises Lita with a prenup, which says that in the event of a divorce, she would walk away with virtually nothing. She's reluctant, but the cake is ordered, the flowers are ready, so Lita signs the agreement and ties the knot anyway.
Lita got married in 1976. It was a small ceremony in Macon, Georgia. Joanne McClinton would later describe that as the worst day of her life.
The newlyweds settle some 80 miles south of Atlanta near Jim's business in Macon. It's a world away from Atlanta. But Lita agrees to give up her current job and her income and become full-time Mrs. Jim Sullivan.
They bought a house in Shirley Hills, a very affluent, very white part of Macon. Joanne and Emery McClinton feared for their daughter. Being part of an interracial couple in Macon, Georgia in the 1970s would have been extraordinarily challenging. The neighbors were like, "You have the gall to bring a black wife to Shirley Hills." People threw garbage on their doorstep.
The out-and-out racism had to be tough for Lita. But she moves forward and makes some new connections and friends, including Yvette Miller.
When Lita and Yvette occasionally go out to eat, she notices something a bit curious.
We'd go out to lunch at a nice restaurant, and she couldn't pay the bill. And I would end up picking up the check.
And they were a wealthy couple.
They were very wealthy.
Then one Christmas season, a card arrives in the mail addressed to Jim. Lita opens it, and what she discovers will make her question everything. Lita and Jim Sullivan's first few months of marriage seemed to be going well.
They were both intelligent, both attractive, definitely upper class, high society.
But just beneath the surface, there's some obvious cracks.
They seemed to be loving at first.
At first?
He was not that nice to her, and he was not that kind to her.
Was he brusque? Was he brash?
He was a bit arrogant. Even though he had all of these resources, he did not, in my opinion, take care of his wife.
Friends say that the once generous millionaire has suddenly become a miser.
He was notoriously cheap.
He would wear his dead uncle's clothes around the house. He would use the sheath from the dry cleaning as saran wrap in the kitchen. He didn't want Lita to work, but he kept her on a very tight allowance where he gave her $150 a week.
Did she express any discontentment with her marriage?
When we were at those restaurants, Jim just does not give me enough money to take care of me and the house. You know, she clearly was not happy.
Was there talk of infidelity?
Lita had several instances where she questioned whether or not her husband was actually having an affair.
One day she finds a long blonde hair in their master bathroom, and she asks Jim about it, and he says, "I don't know what you're talking about." They got into this cycle of, she accused him of philandering. He would deny it, and then he would buy her sort of an expensive jewelry apology.
Then, during the holidays one year, Lita makes another stunning discovery.
A Christmas card came addressed to Jim. She opened it. A woman wrote in something like, "Missing your kisses." The woman's return address was on the envelope, so Lita went and spoke to her. And the woman said that she had been having an affair with Jim.
Lita is distraught and goes home to be with her parents in Atlanta. But her husband manages to lure her back, increasing her weekly allowance in a now post-nuptial agreement.
Now it's $300 instead of $150 a week, but it still shows that all of their assets belong to Jim.
That's right, the successful business, Lita's Mercedes, multiple properties, even her jewelry, still belonged to her husband in the event of a divorce.
But in an attempt at reconciliation, Lita signs the postnup.
Just a few months after Lita signs that agreement, without Lita knowing, Sullivan decides to sell Crown Beverages for $5 million.
And that's not all. He tells her they're moving to Palm Beach, Florida.
Lita was in shock.
She had any clue that he was going to whistle her down to Palm Beach.
But Lita's new Florida home, located a stone's throw from what would become Mar-a-Lago, is more elaborate than she ever would have imagined. Called Casa Alita. It's a 17,000 square foot mansion with 8 oceanfront bedrooms.
It was just unbelievable.
When you went to Jim's home, you go through this tunnel and you would be at the beach. It's your own private beach.
But for Lita, everything that glitters isn't exactly gold.
James Sullivan very much wanted to integrate himself into the upper echelons of society, and his aspirations did not include Lita's participation.
It was not a welcoming place for a black woman to live. And when he found out that to sort of scale the level of social plateau he was looking at in Palm Beach, having a black wife was a serious impediment to that.
She was left out of some affairs, and she really became upset.
So even though they had money, this is a moneyed crowd, didn't really matter though.
He was barely rich compared to Palm Beach.
Did he want to be in that crowd?
Oh yes, he wanted to, be accepted as one of the rich and famous.
It doesn't take long before Jim starts to flirt with other women.
And it's at a cocktail party that one particularly elegant Palm Beach woman catches Sullivan's eye.
Jim sees Suki Rogers, who is a Korean-born socialite.
She was telegenic. She had a spicy personality. I think a man like Jim Sullivan could not help but be intrigued by this beautiful woman.
They started dating. He's still married to Lita.
By now, the Sullivans have been married nearly 10 years, but things are about to explode.
Lita finds women's lingerie in their master bed. It's the bra that broke the camel's back.
She said, I'm done. I'm packing up my stuff, and I'm going back home.
Lita arrives back in Atlanta. The very next day, she files for divorce from Jim.
But Sullivan fights Lita every step of the way, and the divorce drags on.
Did she seem concerned, worried, nervous about her breakup?
What I detected was she was excited, and she was cutting the cord and leaving Jim alone. She wanted her life back.
While Lita is looking forward to a new life of freedom, she can't be happy about the prospect of leaving her marriage with virtually nothing. No career, no Palm Beach mansion, no Buckhead townhouse, and $2,500 a month in alimony for 3 years. So Lita is going to divorce court, determined to fight for what she believes she deserves.
All she wanted was a reasonable financial settlement so that she could kind of go on with her life.
January 16th, 1987 was set up to be a pivotal day in the lives of Lita and Jim Sullivan.
A judge was going to decide whether or not to throw out the postnuptial agreement.
She might get as much as close to $1 million in cash and assets.
The morning of January 16th, Lita Sullivan, she'd lose her life that day in a murder.
With Lita out of the picture, Jim Sullivan stands to gain the property that they had and retain control over all his money.
Sullivan was the main suspect.
That is, until a treasure trove of secret recordings of Lita's private conversations are uncovered. taking this investigation in a whole new direction.
And police are looking at you.
You know, you make a big circle and you put everybody in it that's close to Lita. Everybody's a suspect. But the first one would be the husband.
The first and obvious suspect was James Sullivan, who stood to gain everything from her death, all the property, all the monies, and who was contesting the divorce.
Detectives went down to speak to him in Palm Beach, and they put him through a polygraph.
Jim Sullivan not only passes the polygraph, but there's something else. He has an alibi that puts him nearly 700 miles away from the crime scene.
James Sullivan was actually in Palm Beach at the time of Lita's murder.
When you first look at it, it looks pretty cut and dry. When you interview all the people involved, everybody points in one direction, towards the husband. But when you sit down and look at the facts, I'm not so sure that the husband is the person that committed the crime.
Nothing surfaced in the early stages of the investigation that implicated Jim Sullivan in the murder.
Sullivan is cooperating with authorities, and during his interview with detectives, he mentions the name of his friend, Marvin Marable.
At the time of Lita's death, Marvin and James Sullivan had a very close relationship.
Remember, Marvin Marable is married to Lita's best friend, Poppy, who was in the Buckhead townhouse with her 3-year-old daughter the morning that Lita was murdered. But back before the shooting, the friendship hadn't always sat well with Marvin.
When Lita moved back to Atlanta, they started, hanging out together.
So she's disillusioned by her relationship. Did her failed relationship have any impact on your relationship?
Well, from the standpoint of them, being together all the time and going out, yeah.
Commiserating.
Oh, absolutely. Certainly didn't help. And I can understand her being there for her friend, but, sometimes you can go overboard, which is what happened in our relationship.
Marable, a former New York State trooper turned entrepreneur, says Lita would often spend hours at his home with Poppy. And it was during this time, he says, coincidentally or not, that his own marriage began to unravel.
I found a letter where Poppy was planning to file for divorce.
So she was planning to file for divorce without your knowledge?
Oh, yeah.
That had to be a shocker.
It was.
So then you decided to try something a little questionable after that.
I have a background in law enforcement. I don't see it as questionable. It's your own telephone in your own house. I put a recorder on the, people call it a tap, on the phone, and I started recording conversations.
In the house phone?
Mm-hmm. On the house phone.
He began listening to Poppy and Lita's conversations and ended up recording more than 300 hours.
In doing those very personal conversations between girlfriends, Marvin Marable learns that there may be some information that James Sullivan might be interested in learning that will be helpful for him in his divorce case.
He tells Sullivan about the tapes and what's on them, specifically Lita's post-divorce plans.
And soon enough, the two disgruntled husbands are conspiring to get the best of their soon-to-be ex-wives in divorce court.
Marvin Marable travels down to Palm Beach under a false name, and the two men listen to the tapes, and Marvin says, "I'm not going to record anymore," and Jim says, no, keep recording.
Was there talk of money?
Yeah, he offered $30,000.
Jim says to Marvin, if the judge decides to honor the postnuptial agreement, he's going to give Marvin $30,000 for the use of the information on the tapes.
What kinds of things did Lita talk about that could be helpful to either one of you?
There were some guys that, she would talk to, but she was legally separated.
But then, just a few days after Marvin and Jim's secret meeting at Casa Elita,
Poppy and Lita somehow discovered the recording device.
How did they react?
It wasn't nice. She filed for divorce the next day.
She was angry.
She was very angry.
Lita was upset too, so upset that she reported Marvin to the authorities, and he was charged with possession of an eavesdropping device. So when police questioned Sullivan about who might have a motive to murder his wife, he tells them to look no further than Marvin Marable.
And sure enough, only a few days after Lita's death, Marvin is being questioned by the Atlanta Police Department about Lita's murder.
I go down for the interview, and the first thing they did is read me my rights. And from there on, it was just a nightmare. I was a prime suspect.
You have a law enforcement background, so you knew what police
So
were.
I knew that I was being followed. I could pick the investigators, police, could pick them out all the time. Jim had mentioned my name to them. He said, look at Marvin Merrill.
This was serious stuff.
Oh, yeah.
How worried were you?
I was very worried.
Joanne and Emery McClinton were beyond devastated. Their eldest daughter was dead. Just 3 days after Lita's murder, they held a funeral.
Days dissolve into months, and authorities are no closer to finding Lita Sullivan's murderer.
The case is just sort of growing colder and colder by the minute.
And while Marvin Marable might have been angry at Lita for pressing those charges against him for eavesdropping, there was no evidence he was responsible for her death.
I know that people get wrongly accused, wrongly convicted, and so the only saving grace is the fact that I knew I was innocent.
By process of elimination is you can determine the pieces that don't fit.
And just eliminate them.
The way in which we eliminated Marvin Marable as a suspect, there was just not enough to connect him directly to the crime itself.
As for that eavesdropping device charge, Marvin was put on probation, which he completed, and then he was exonerated. But on those recordings Marable made, Lita had talked about other men, something that her soon-to-be ex-husband Sullivan pointed out to police.
He made allegations that she was participating in extramarital affairs, and that perhaps this was the action of, you know, a disgruntled boyfriend.
We have a lot of major players. At this point in the investigation, we have a lot of suspects.
One of the first men police question is a professional athlete.
Lita and him had been friends when she was in Palm Beach. The police quickly found out that he was in prison for drug possession.
That athlete is behind bars when Lita is killed, so clearly he can't be the trigger man. Then investigators turn their sights to a prominent Atlanta businessman.
And he and Lita had been childhood friends, and they sort of rekindled their friendship. And they realized that he had no motive, and they found nothing that connected him.
Authorities also take a hard look at another suitor who had taken Lita to dinner the night before her death. And get this, had also given her 2 roses.
The suspect was a man named Bob Daniel, and Bob had had an incident a couple months before the murder where, in a drunken rage, he came to Lita's house, smashed his car into the garage, and as the cops were taking him away, he said, "I'm gonna kill that." So, serious red flag.
But that lead didn't go anywhere either.
Bob had just had quadruple bypass surgery. You know, the police ultimately decided that Bob had nothing to do with it.
It's the unknowing that makes it so difficult. And to know that there are individuals who may be walking around now planning and plotting to do the same thing to somebody else is abhorrent to me.
I remember having the impression it was like a festering wound for them.
The McClintons want to draw attention to a $25,000 reward in the case.
The cause of finding justice for Lita became their obsession, became their passion.
The reward is for the arrest and conviction of those individuals responsible for our daughter's murder.
To catch Lita's killer, the Atlanta Police Department assigns 2 veteran detectives to the case.
If Lieutenant Walker bears a resemblance to actor Billy D. Williams, Welcome Harris reminds one of Columbo, the dogged, disheveled detective of television fame.
Building a murder case was like making a mosaic. You know, you get a shiny piece of glass here, a gem there. You put it together and you hope that from it emerges the shimmering image of a killer.
This particular case deals with what I consider to be high society. It contains a little bit of everything. Intrigue, mystery.
These days, a lot of murders are solved using DNA technology, ring camera technology. But back then, it was detective work.
She was shot with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun.
Most important thing found at the crime scene was the roses.
They canvassed all the area flower shops and quickly found that the roses had been purchased at the Botany Bay flower shop.
They interviewed the worker in there, and he told them that this guy came in about 8 o'clock and bought these roses and paid in cash and then left. And he was in a small car.
The florist gave a description of the man buying the flowers and another man who was waiting in the car.
So detectives know they're looking for at least 2 men.
Until yet another person is described to police, that flower delivery man who had looked Lita's neighbor right in the eye.
There was a next-door neighbor of Lita's, lived over on the right side of her condo. He lived there. His name was Bob Christensen.
He actually gave a description of the flower delivery man as a Caucasian, middle-aged man.
They went down to the police station and worked with a police artist and got sketches. As the sketches were being completed, the officers were realizing, obviously, that the shooter was not Jim Sullivan and that the other individuals were all 3 distinct individuals. They didn't look anything like each other, so therefore we knew 3 people were involved.
For investigators, this has all the earmarks of only one thing: murder for hire.
All the evidence pointed to a hitman showing up at the front door, posing as a flower delivery man, and firing a gunshot into Lita's head.
With investigators now exploring the possibility that Lita was murdered by a hired gunman, another critical piece of evidence comes to light: a mysterious phone call.
And what they found was that on the same day that Lita was murdered, about an hour after the actual shooting, there was a collect phone call that was placed from a payphone right outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
Was this a call from the killer?
I don't know about you, I haven't had a collect call from a payphone, so as a cop you probably go, I wonder if that's connected.
And a tip from a woman 700 miles away may just be the big break investigators have been waiting for.
I said, anyone knows that if you wanted to get a woman to answer the door, all you would have to do is take flowers to the door.
This was a huge puzzle of a case.
A hitman showing up at the front door, posing as a flower delivery man, firing a gunshot into Lita's head.
How did your puzzle-solving skills come into play?
You figure out what fits and what doesn't fit.
I want everyone listening to this to know that I am absolutely innocent.
The loss of a daughter.
They still don't have the murder weapon.
But they do have witnesses.
Do you know anybody can possibly take care of my problem for me? Because I need some help here.
Anyone knows that if you wanted to get a woman to answer the door, all you would have to do is take flowers to the door.
She suggested the flowers.
She suggested the flowers.
You actually brought in a doorbell. Why?
To have that sense of what Lita Sullivan experienced right before her murder. She's about to meet her maker.
It's a deadly delivery of a dozen pink roses. 35-year-old Lita McClinton Sullivan opens her front door and is suddenly gunned down.
On the year anniversary of Lita's death, there are no named suspects. They still don't have a murder weapon. They don't have a hitman. They don't have a paper trail that ties Jim or anyone else to a hit.
But that's about to change when they get Jim Sullivan's phone records.
On the same day that Lita was murdered, about an hour or so after the actual shooting, there was a collect phone call to James Sullivan's home in Palm Beach, Florida.
It turns out to be from a rest stop in Suwanee, Georgia, maybe 30 or 40 miles from Buckhead. Using a phone call to call another state, that opens up federal jurisdiction. In this case, that's the FBI.
We believed the phone call from Suwanee Rest Stop to his home in Palm Beach, Florida, was sufficient indication that a contract hitter may have called him after doing the job.
Enter Special Agent John Kingston, who takes a particular interest in that phone call and a whole slew of other calls Jim Sullivan made and received around the time of Lita's murder.
I got a whole year's worth, 6 months before the murder to 6 months after the murder.
Kingston notices a few calls, and one of them was to Bob Christensen, Lita's neighbor. When Kingston talks to Bob, he finds out that Jim had called Bob 3 days before the murder.
Sullivan said, had he seen anything suspicious around Lita's townhouse?
And Bob finds it strange. He hasn't talked to Jim in over a year.
Bob Christensen shares something else with Agent Kingston. On the same day Jim Sullivan called him, 3 days before the fatal flower delivery, Lita heard a loud knock on her door at 5 or 6 in the morning. It was so early and so unnerving, she didn't answer it.
So that made the call that he got from Jim even more suspicious.
Kingston also finds that a call is made between Jim's house and a Howard Johnson's motel in Atlanta, just a couple of miles from Lita's house. This is really strange. One thing that he's learned about Jim is that he's not a Hojo's kind of guy. So he goes to the Howard Johnsons and asks if he can look through the records.
They gave me the shoebox with all the registration cards, and I pick out 3 that I thought, well, these are awfully interesting. So I said, do you guys have the phone records? They said, yeah, sure we do. And I'm thinking, boy, these people keep really good records, and they keep them for a long time, and I'm really glad. They bring me the phone records for January 13th. I'm flipping through them, and all of a sudden I see 305 Palm Beach, South Florida area code. And I'm pretty sure it's Jim's number. And so I check my records real quick, and I go, yep, that's his number. And then I look, and I said, oh, look, it's from 518. That's one of the 3 cards I pulled out. Well, it just so happens I have a copy of it here. And one of the things it imparts is 3 individuals checked into the room. The individual who actually registered used the name Johnny Furr, but 3 individuals is important to me because I think 3 people involved in the crime. They put their car down as a Toyota 85 with a North Carolina plate. We believe that a Toyota was the getaway car for the murder. So there's 2 coincidences already.
But remember, these motel records are from January 13th. Lita was murdered 3 days later on the 16th. Special Agent Kingston is beginning to surmise that the killers may have tried and failed to get to her once before.
What I believe it to be is the killers having come down 3 days before the actual murder was committed, knocking on her door, her not answering it, and them having to stop and regroup and figure out what plan B is going to be. So I am in love with this registration card and becomes the focal point of my life for the next several months.
Kingston's next move is to locate this so-called Johnny Fur with the North Carolina license plate.
And to my surprise, there are 150 John or Johnny Furs in North Carolina. But to my great surprise, 115 of these 150 are in a very small circle in North Carolina, between the three cities of Albemarle, Concord, and Kannapolis.
They're going to knock on every door and find this Johnny Fur. Of course, they're coming from Georgia, and anytime the FBI goes and investigates in another state, they need that state's approval. And just as they're about to get to the state border, their boss calls them and says, North Carolina's denying you entry, and they'll take it from here.
And that pretty much kills my case. that kills my case.
Yeah, soon after that, Agent Kingston is transferred to another job, and that whole investigation just sort of fades away. Meantime, in Palm Beach, Jim and Suki are living the high life. So with Lita out of the picture, Jim is free to marry Suki, which he does 8 months after Lita's murder.
He's thinking that he's the cat's meow. Eating in restaurants in Palm Beach, going to parties, got another attractive woman on his arm.
Jim drives around town in a Rolls Royce and gets into a fender bender and has to go to traffic court. Jim says to the judge, well, you've misunderstood. I wasn't even driving that day. Suki was driving. So the judge says, we're going to throw it out. However, the cop who was on the scene catches wind, and he says Suki wasn't even in the car that day. It was Jim driving alone. So now Jim has perjured himself, as has Suki.
Jim ultimately got convicted of perjury, was given a year probation and a year of home confinement.
Suki Sullivan also receives a year of probation.
Suki's freaking out. When she gets charged with perjury on his behalf, she's like, I'm done with this. Suki files for divorce from Jim. And the trial that follows is the juiciest, craziest gossip in town. So when it's Suki's turn to testify, she drops a bomb.
Did he talk to you about his former wife, Lita?
Yes.
Tell me what it was he said to you about Lita.
You can hear a pin drop. It's a big moment. After 33 months of marriage, Suki files for divorce from Jim.
Not surprisingly, it's another disputed divorce. But what might have been typical testimony about alimony takes a sudden turn in court.
Tell me what it was he said to you about Lita.
He hired someone to work with her.
I'm sorry?
He hired someone to work with her.
She claimed that he confessed to her that he had Lita killed.
This became a bombshell in the investigation of the murder of Lita Sullivan.
Suki Sullivan's divorce testimony may be big news for the FBI, but it has zero impact on the divorce judgment, which favors her husband, Jim Sullivan, in nearly every way.
His divorce was complete, but his life with turmoil was just beginning.
The opulent ocean-facing Palm Beach Palace may look like something out of The Great Gatsby, but while we watched, a new chapter in a crime story was unfolding.
We develop information here at WSB. There's going to be a raid on Jim Sullivan's Palm Beach mansion, and that is the biggest break in the Lita Sullivan case since the murder itself.
Investigators from the FBI, Atlanta Police, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation were on the grounds of a mansion identified as that of James Sullivan.
All of a sudden, Jim Sullivan is clearly in the crosshairs of federal authorities.
They got a tip that Jim, now a convicted felon, has guns in the house. Of course, you're not allowed to have guns if you're a convicted felon. So they put together a sweeping affidavit to get a search warrant.
We did see a number of guns loaded into a car and this box carried out.
When they found the guns, he was in violation of his probation, and so he went to jail for 9 months.
All this time, a federal grand jury has been convening in Atlanta.
They've got what they found in the mansion. They got what they found in the phone records. They've got Suki Sullivan. They've got the neighbors. What they don't have are the identities of the hit team. There's a problem, though.
We, the federal government, have a 5-year statute of limitations, which is going to be up on January 16th of '92.
With 5 or 6 days to go before it expired, the U.S. attorney made a bold decision. We're going to take our best shot with what we got right now, so they indict Jim Sullivan.
Jim Sullivan is indicted on multiple counts of arranging Lita's murder for hire through interstate phone calls.
Millionaire James V. Sullivan is on trial in connection with an alleged murder for hire plot. Here he arrives for the first day of trial testimony.
It was a trial that transfixed Atlanta. I mean, it was something we were covering on basically a daily basis, but we couldn't have it on camera because it's federal court.
It looks like the family is finally going to have some accountability for the murder of their daughter, Lita.
The prosecution suggests the killers were calling Sullivan from the rest stop to say the job was done. The defense suggests otherwise.
Jim Sullivan is lawyered up with the best criminal defense lawyers that you can find anywhere in Atlanta and maybe in the whole country.
There is no evidence at this point in this case who placed that call or whether that call was placed by anyone connected with the crime.
The prosecutor spent 2 weeks telling their side of the story.
Suki, the woman he married months after Lita's death, delivered some of the most dramatic testimony the jury has heard.
They build what they feel like is a really strong case.
And then a big bombshell hits.
The judge says, I'm forced to dismiss this case for lack of evidence.
Judge Marvin Shube ruled that, in effect, even if Sullivan may have been involved in the murder for hire, the government fell short in proving the phone calls related to the murder.
Well, this is one of the most difficult decisions I had to make because I firmly believe in the jury system.
And then he looks at Jim and he says, you've been acquitted.
This was ultra shocking.
Suddenly it's over, and Jim is a free man.
I want everyone listening to this to know that I am absolutely innocent. I had nothing to do with Lita's death. Her death was a great tragedy, and I thank God and my attorneys that this ordeal is over.
The family at that point, I guess, is just sort of at a loss. How devastating was that for them?
They felt like the justice system had let them down.
I was not expecting this. It's extremely difficult.
The system today is weighed in the favor of the defense.
James Sullivan seems to have gotten away with murder.
But Lita's parents aren't giving up.
They file a wrongful death suit in Palm Beach, Florida, and they win.
We, the jury, return the following verdict.
The jury deems that Jim is guilty of wrongful death.
Total damages of the estate of Lita McClinton Sullivan, $4 million.
But Sullivan is able to hide his assets and not pay any of the civil judgment.
Jim Sullivan appealed their civil judgment, and he won by having the Florida court say that they had filed it after the Florida statute of limitations.
Once again, Jim has wiggled out of any responsibility, and the family is left dumbfounded.
Until
a call is received out of the blue.
A young woman comes forward. It proved to be the break in the case that everyone was looking for.
11 years have gone by since Lita Sullivan was gunned down on her doorstep when a tip comes in from a town 700 miles away.
A call is received out of the blue, and the individual calling is an attorney in Beaumont, Texas. He has a receptionist whose name is Belinda Trahan, who has told him a very unusual story about her boyfriend, Tony Harwood.
Belinda and Tony lived together in Albemarle, North Carolina. And he was a long-distance truck driver for North American Van Lines.
He basically drove a moving truck.
Belinda tells her boss about a time that Tony came home from a long-haul trucking trip and said that a rich white man in Florida offered to pay him to, quote, take care of his black wife in Georgia. At the time, Belinda didn't believe it. She thought he must be cheating on her.
Belinda thought that it was Tony just trying to get out of town and go down to Atlanta to the strip bars.
Until he took her to meet this rich white guy in a diner somewhere, and he got a wad full of money.
She says he sits down briefly in their booth and gives Tony Harwood the balance owed for the hit on the man's wife.
Belinda Trahan tells her boss that soon after this bizarre trip, she broke up with Tony Harwood and moved to Texas. But now, 11 years later, she says that he mysteriously reached out to her again, asking her to meet him at a nearby truck stop.
She's afraid that he may commit harm to her.
And it's this new tip from Belinda Trahan that sends Georgia authorities to the Lone Star State, turning up the heat on an otherwise cold case.
Georgia Bureau of Investigator Agent John Lang takes a detective from the Atlanta Police Department and goes down to Texas to talk to Belinda.
She was with Tony when they met this mysterious man at this diner that they were meeting at. We wanted to show her a lineup of pictures in hopes that she could pick Sullivan out of it.
And she takes her pink fingernail and taps right on Jim Sullivan's face and says, "This is the man."
My plan of attack was to get some recordings with her and Tony. So we got her to get in touch with Tony again.
She's talking to him and trying to coax information out of him, knowing John Lang is listening on her end. And Tony gives enough information that places him at the scene at the time.
We had the phone calls with Tony. She picked Jim Sullivan out of the lineup. There was still more investigation to do. We really didn't know who Tony Harwood was.
John Lang knows that Tony worked at North American Van Lines. So he calls up North American Van Lines and he says, "Hey, you don't happen to have your records from 11 years ago?" And the guy says, "Yeah, there's some boxes full of files up in a musty attic. You're more than welcome to go poke around."
We went up into a hot attic and opened the first box that I went through. And about the third document I looked at was Jim Sullivan. His address was on it, Palm Beach, Florida. His signature was on it, and Tony Harwood's signature was on it.
He finds a bill of lading showing that Tony Harwood moved furniture for Jim Sullivan 2 months before the murder. And it's the paper trail he needs. It's like the jackpot.
Astounding. I don't know any other way to explain it. I mean, open this box and like the third record I look at, here it is. I mean, it just like it was meant to be.
On a Sunday morning in April of 1998, John Lang and local authorities go knock on Tony's door in Albemarle, North Carolina. Tony answers the door.
And he said, "You know, I've been waiting on you boys for a long time."
They take Tony to the Albemarle police station. Lang interviews Tony for 3 hours in this tiny room. But at the end of the day, Tony admits to taking money from Jim, $25,000, to take care of Lita. He also tells the detectives that he wasn't the one to pull the trigger, but that he was there the day of the murder.
He went through the whole case. And throughout the interview, he incriminated himself even more. I mean, admitted that he was there. He knew what happened. So he was arrested for murder of Lita Sullivan. And we took him back to Atlanta that day.
After Tony's arrest, things moved pretty quickly.
We are here today to announce the issuance of a warrant for the arrest of James V. Sullivan.
They got enough to get Sullivan. And now, boom, Sullivan hears of this and blows. He takes off.
We have reason to believe that he's outside the country.
He's just gone, vanished.
Investigators say he could be anywhere.
He is nowhere to be found.
We certainly do not know where Mr. Sullivan is. We have reason to believe that he's outside the country.
More than a decade after his wife Lita was murdered, Jim Sullivan seems to be playing a game of catch me if you can with authorities.
There is an international manhunt for James Sullivan.
Well, Jim had moved to Costa Rica, actually bought a home there. In 1998, after an arrest warrant was issued for him, he immediately, like that night, went to Panama.
If you have any information concerning James Sullivan, you should contact the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate.
We didn't know exactly where he had flown from Panama, and we didn't know exactly where he had gone.
His trail goes cold.
They put him on Interpol, and it was just cold.
They've tapped phone lines, anybody that he might have called, and he's called no one, not even his mother.
There was a few tips that came in. The tips are just dead ends.
The McClintons, they're dumbfounded that this guy could, get away again.
But in late 1999, with Sullivan still completely off the grid, the heartbroken Emery and Joanne McClinton do get some good news.
Last week came this, a court decision reinstating a $4 million judgment against Jim Sullivan in connection with a wrongful death case brought in effect by Lita's estate.
Lita's family and law enforcement officials hope that a renewed hunt for Sullivan's money will help smoke him out.
Where you find Sullivan's money, you're going to find him close by.
But even this goes nowhere.
Fast forward to 2002. There is no sign of Jim Sullivan.
We tried every effort in our arsenal to try and locate him, to put him on the FBI's wanted list, but to also put him on the top 10 list, which is very unusual. You don't get on the top 10 list very easily. Then we also featured him on America's Most Wanted.
The most recent picture we have of Sullivan is at least 5 years old, so the FBI age-enhanced this photo, which may bear a closer resemblance to Sullivan's appearance today. If you recognize James Sullivan from either of these photographs, call us now at 1-800-CRIME-TV.
A man sees America's Most Wanted on television and goes, I know that guy. He lives in my condo complex in Chiang, Thailand. And sure enough, he calls the authorities.
He went to Panama, to Venezuela, and eventually to Thailand, where he got a beachfront condo.
He spends his days walking on the beach, sitting by the pool, occasionally playing tennis, as though no other troubles in the world. The Thai police knock on Jim Sullivan's door on July 2nd, 2002, and say, you're under arrest. The McClintons can hardly believe it.
We found out from the FBI, and that was a moment of jubilation.
15 years is a long time to concentrate on the loss of a daughter. And we had determination, and we had the will. And we also had all of these individuals behind us.
Almost as soon as Jim Sullivan is arrested for murder, Tony Harwood, who has continued to deny being the trigger man, agrees to a plea deal.
Tony kind of sees the writing on the wall.
Harwood just decided that he would plead guilty, a negotiated plea for manslaughter, and that, in turn, that he would testify against Jim Sullivan.
It took 2 years, but he finally was extradited back to Atlanta in 2004.
He got off the plane. He was wearing a single shoe because he had such terrible gout in his foot. But he gets off and gets taken to Fulton County Jail. And there's this sort of cumulative sigh of relief.
To be clear, Sullivan being tried for murder in Georgia is not double jeopardy. For one thing, it is a state case, and the previous one was a federal case, and that specifically was for arranging Lita's murder for hire over the phone.
The elected district attorney appoints me, along with a couple of other lawyers, to prosecute the case.
This was a huge puzzle of a case.
Right.
How did your puzzle-solving skills come into play?
There's no cutting corners, and you spread the pieces out, and then you figure out what fits and what doesn't fit. And that's kind of what the prosecution of James Sullivan was like. It was putting together all these different pieces so that we could make sure that the prosecution of the case was done accurately and with integrity.
What concerned you going into this trial?
He was rich. He was a white male. He had escaped the federal authorities before, and he had two of the best criminal defense attorneys representing him.
They are sharp, and if they can find a way out, they're going to find a way out.
There will not be one shred of physical evidence that links Jim Sullivan to this crime.
Jim has eluded justice so many times that there's a real palpable fear that he's going to get away with it, that he's going to elude justice again.
After nearly 20 years, Jim Sullivan is finally on trial here in Fulton County for the murder of his wife, Lita. For her heartbroken parents, this day couldn't come soon enough.
The pain, believe it or not, it increases. It does not decrease. The shock decreases. The depression decreases. But the pain continues.
It was an A-team of prosecutors, great courtroom performers.
Clint Rucker was the lead prosecutor, and Anna Grain, Kelly Hill, Sheila Ross.
And the evidence will show that the person who sent that hitman to Lita's door is the only person in the world who could have profited from her death. It is the only person in the world who met Tony Harwood and paid him off for killing her, and is the only person in the world who fled halfway around the world to avoid facing you.
Jury was 9 women and 3 men.
The jury is also racially mixed.
Jim Sullivan had Ed Garland and Don Samuel, again, the people who won that big courtroom victory against the feds.
What the state relies on is 2 types of evidence. Circumstantial evidence, and then the testimony of con men.
The state initially started out the nature of the crime and what happened that morning.
I heard 2 sounds. They sounded to me like steel hitting steel.
I just didn't want to believe that it was a gun. And so I hesitated for a second, and then I really knew that it was a gun.
She was able to squeeze my hand each time I spoke with her, like she understood what I was saying. And for many, many years after this, I thought that's all it was. And then one day I realized that she was comforting me more than I was comforting her. That was the sort of lady I felt she was.
They had the phone calls that the FBI had found.
There was a call from this room to Mr. Sullivan's home at 7:44 in the morning.
But all this testimony notwithstanding, It's Belinda Trahan and Tony Harwood who everybody wants to hear from.
Belinda Trahan was the most important witness in the case.
He told me that some white guy who wanted to take out his black wife. I didn't believe it.
Why not?
I've been with him for 3 years, over 3 years. I mean, I figured he met someone because we were on the outs.
Most chilling about Belinda's testimony is that she confirms that there was at least one failed attempt on Lita's life.
She testifies that when Tony had gone to Lita's house on January 13th, then she didn't come to the door. They drove back to North Carolina and told Belinda that, it didn't work.
But Belinda testifies that hearing that from her boyfriend left her incredulous.
I said, just don't even lie to me. I said, because anyone knows that if you wanted to get a woman to answer the door, all you would have to do is take flowers to the door.
Did you in any way mean for that to be a suggestion as to how to get the job accomplished?
No, not at all.
Here's Belinda Trahan, and she is falling on the sword about what she did.
She suggested the flowers.
She suggested the flowers, and she admitted that on the stand.
You brought in the diner booth where they sat. Why couldn't you just tell the jury and show pictures?
I want you to see the puzzle once it's all put together. Yeah, I can show you the box. I can show you a photograph of it. But when I put it together and I show it to you, you'll never forget it.
Push the paper across the table like this, and then Tony put his hand on it and took it from there.
And there was a particular moment when she is asked to stand up in court and identifies the person she witnessed give Tony Harwood an envelope full of money.
Please, point him out.
It's right there. He can't even make eye contact.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant, James Sullivan.
But if prosecutors feel like Belinda Trahan's testimony is helping their case, they have to know that it's just as big a risk to put Tony Harwood on the stand.
Can you show the jurors the body language Mr. Sullivan used and the tone of voice, if it's possible, that he used when he was explaining to you that his wife Lita was a problem?
You know, I've got this wife of mine up in Atlanta, and she is just trying to take everything I've got. And I don't know what to do about it. I need someone to take care of my problem. Do you know anybody who can possibly take care of my problem for me? Because I need some help here.
We could prove Tony Harwood and James Sullivan actually met each other. So I spent the first part of Tony Harwood's examination confirming his signature on the hotel receipt.
And I put signature, Johnny Kerr.
The fact that he actually went to the flower shop.
Who actually went inside the flower shop to purchase the flowers?
I did.
They had Tony Harwood saying that he was the one who made the collect call to Jim Sullivan's house.
What did you say to him?
I said, Merry Christmas. And he said, I understand. And that was it.
What were you trying to convey to Mr. Sullivan by giving him that signal, those code words?
That his problem was taken care of.
The defense had their chance to cross-examine Harwood. Not a single question. The two key witnesses were, of course, Belinda Trahan and Tony Harwood. And so, in closing arguments, the defense assailed their credibility.
You should reject everything that came out of his mouth. Harwood says an envelope in the bathroom. She says an envelope at this booth over here.
Garland presents to the jury a letter-sized envelope stuffed with bills. Harwood had said it was all cash in $20 bills.
See, oops, some of it fell out, and some more. It won't fit in an envelope. The whole story just doesn't make sense.
In your closing arguments, you actually brought in a doorbell. Why? What was the point?
I wanted the jurors to have that sense of what Lita Sullivan experienced right before her murder.
An ordinary moment.
In an ordinary moment. The second reason why I did it is because James Sullivan liked to read books. And one of his favorite authors wrote a book called For Whom the Bell Tolls.
I am going to ask you through your verdict of guilty to each and every count to tell James Vincent Sullivan for whom the bell tolls. Tell him that it tolls for thee. For you. For you.
And then I rang the doorbell 3 times.
As the jury goes out to deliberate, I think there's a real fear. Are they going to do it this time, or is it going to be like every other time?
I do not see this as a slam dunk for the state.
There's this anxiety. You're worried, but you're hopeful. I don't care who you talk to that does this kind of work as a litigator. They will tell you, oh, I can look at the jurors and I probably can tell you what they're going to do. No, you don't. You don't.
This is breaking news.
We do have breaking news at this hour. The jury having reached a verdict in the trial of Jim Sullivan.
The jury came back within a few hours on the same day.
It was so silent, and the tension was just palpable.
There's this anxiety. You don't know what it's going to be. You don't know how it's going to turn out. And you're worried, but you're hopeful.
It's hard not to think of Lita's family, her parents especially, after so many fits and starts to win justice for their firstborn child. It comes down to this moment.
The judge says,
"Ma'am, would you publish the verdict?"
And then from that moment until they get finished, nobody is breathing.
Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, James Vincent Sullivan, guilty of malice murder.
I got a chance to hug Emory McClinton. I had never been hugged so tight before. This was his baby. And we had finally, after 19 years, brought that man a sense of satisfaction. I'll never forget it. The conviction of James Sullivan was the biggest puzzle that I had solved in my career. And it is one that gave me the most satisfaction that I had ever experienced as a prosecutor.
The court hears victim impact statements. What a loss it was to have Lita gone from their lives.
I dream of Lita often. She is smiling and walking in my direction, and I in hers. But we never reach each other.
The jury came back and gave him life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I am so very pleased, and I'm happy. What we were waiting for was something in our judicial system, something to happen and to bring it all together, and that's what you see today.
Why did it take 20 years, do you think?
It goes back to the resources.
He had privilege?
White privilege, completely. He knew how to manipulate people, and he had the resources to do that.
You've got a black victim, you've got a white defendant. Did race hover in this courtroom over this case at all?
I think in our criminal justice system, unfortunately, race always permeates throughout a case. But I'm thankful to say the evidence in the case overcame that racial component.
They never received any money. Is there money? Where is this money?
He's been able to secret his money. For the McClintons, seeing him rot in a prison in South Georgia brings them a whole lot more satisfaction.
This is a woman who you never met, I've never met, most of the people involved in this case never met her, and yet her life really made an impact. When somebody dies in this kind of manner, they don't stop being a member of the family, they don't stop being a member of the community, they never stop mattering.
David, Tony Harwood was released from prison in 2018 after serving his 20-year sentence. Jim Sullivan remains behind bars with no possibility of parole.
As for the other two men who were seen at that flower shop, no one else was ever charged. That is our program for tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm David Muir.
And I'm Deborah Roberts. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.
She'd found her mother laying in a pool of blood. There was shock across the whole town.
He was an extremely angry individual who felt cheated at life.
I want everybody to stop treating everybody like they're on their shoe.
A very dangerous man who could pass in society quietly underground until triggered.
He posted that chilling message.
Watch out for my next magic trick.
He was the angel of death.
On the stunning Sussex coastline lies the seaside town of Eastbourne.
Eastbourne has a traditional view that it's a retirement town where not a lot happens really.
It's just really nice and it's friendly. You feel on the whole quite safe.
There's nice restaurants, cafes. It's lovely in the summer. It's quite magical in some ways. We love it.
I think there is quite a good neighbourhood vibe here and people know each other.
It's got a really tight-knit feel to it. There's a really good community spirit.
It's got palm trees and a sandy beach and the pier. It's just a sunny little town on the coast, really.
In this sunny little town on the coast lives Sabrina Cooper. At 68, she's not long retired from her family business.
Sabrina Cooper ran a magic shop in Eastbourne for a number of years. She was the niece of Tommy Cooper, the comedian and magician.
Tommy Cooper was the most celebrated comedian and magician for a generation. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that everyone within Eastbourne, and in fact throughout the whole country, would have known of the relationship between Sabrina Cooper and, of course, her very famous uncle, Tommy Cooper. He was a household name, he was a legend.
In keeping with the family tradition, Sabrina's magic shop drew in tourists and residents alike.
I remember seeing the things in the magic shop, some of which looked quite intriguing.
And I remember the sign outside and all the painting, like I think it had a hat with a rabbit coming out and things like that.
Sabrina was very well liked. I mean, everybody in Eastbourne would have known the shop and probably been in it at some point and would have encountered a friendly woman who knew her stuff and was a well-known feature of the community.
She had more recently rented out that property to a burger company, but she remained living above it, and she was known around the cafes locally for always walking her dogs.
She had two dogs, Abra and Trix. Those two dogs were the love of her life. Sabrina was described by everyone who had met her as a kind, caring and loving lady. She would do any good deed for anyone. She was much loved within her family. She was a highly respected and much valued member of the community in Eastbourne.
For Sabrina, Christmas was a big time of the year. It was her favourite time of the year. And coming up to Christmas 2022 would have been a really important time for her.
On the 16th of December of 2022, Sabrina Cooper had completed on the sale of the property that she had owned, lived in, and had been the magic shop. She had been there for a number of years. She was moving on to the next chapter of her life, which was still to be in Eastbourne. She'd found a property that she wanted to move to. She was very excited to move out of the town centre and to have a quieter life.
But this festive season in Eastbourne will never be forgotten.
Shortly before 4 p.m, Sabrina's mother phoned Sabrina's daughter because she couldn't get hold of Sabrina on the telephone.
The daughter tried to contact her mother several occasions till eventually she went round to the actual property.
Sabrina's daughter arrived at Sabrina's house, saw a kitchen light on and assumed that Sabrina was in. Fortunately, she had a key, so allowed herself in. She put the key in the lock, turned the lock, entered.
And she found, shockingly, her mother lying at the bottom of the stairs with the two family dogs sitting by her side. It was a very, very chilling moment. On close inspection, she realised there was a large pool of blood on the floor, and her mother wasn't moving at all.
One of her arms was trapped beneath her body. It certainly wouldn't be something that you'd wish a daughter to find.
To find your mother in that state, or to find anybody in that state, would be utterly horrific.
Sabrina's daughter went straight to her mum, tried to shake her, tried to rouse her.
Her daughter came to realise at that specific moment, tragically, that her mother was dead.
Emergency services were called. Her mother had recently had a major operation. Initially, the fear was that she had injured herself and ruptured the stitches that she'd had from the abdominal surgery.
When the paramedics first arrived, initially, of course, they checked for signs of life and confirmed that she had in fact died. They assumed as well that she had had a fall and it was the surgical incisions that had bled. They called the police because it was a sudden death.
But it wasn't established until 9 p.m. later that night, when the police arrived, that in fact this was not a sudden death, that something more sinister was afoot.
They, together with the paramedics, examined Sabrina, and it was immediately apparent on doing so that she had suffered stab wounds.
A number of puncture wounds had been found on Sabrina's abdomen.
This wasn't some form of tragic accident. It was obvious to the paramedics that this lady had been murdered. This was a murder investigation.
Forensic investigators are called to Sabrina's home.
The first thing that the police would do in a crime scene is close that scene off.
That means gaining control of the scene. That means limiting the number of people within a scene. You want to preserve it as much as possible.
A scenes of crime officer would have attended with his team, and they would have checked for any form of forensic evidence, for any evidential clues that would assist them in their investigation. And of course, the key target was finding out who was responsible for this heinous crime.
Police need to consider if this is a burglary gone wrong.
Sabrina's purse was open. It looked like it'd been ransacked. There were no coins in there. There was no cash.
And there was a coin on the floor that they noticed, which they thought looked slightly out of place and odd.
Almost giving the impression that somebody had very quickly emptied the contents.
In fact, Sabrina's mother had given her a sum of money the day before. That money mysteriously was now missing.
But as officers continue to search the home, a different scenario begins to emerge.
Something sinister obviously had happened. But I think the first thing which is remarkable in this case is the police realised that there hadn't been a break-in. Nothing really had been ransacked, none of the windows had been smashed, the door locks were still secured. The evidence tends to suggest that it must have been someone who was known to this lady.
Sabrina was a single woman, but her daughter alerts the team to something else out of place.
It was rather odd because the table had been set for 2 people.
She noticed 2 used mugs in the sink.
There was a candle burning in the room. Just some really strange things that raised suspicions.
It's not long before news of a crime scene in the vicinity spreads.
I worked with a photographer in Eastbourne and he found the scene there and took pictures. Straight away, we knew there was a scene, we knew it looked like a murder. We were kind of trying to assess what was going on. The next thing to do is to contact the police and ask them. Eventually they did confirm that it was a murder inquiry.
When something particularly violent like a murder happens, there would have been shock across the whole town.
Sabrina Cooper was well known in the community, and of course when the police cordoned the area off, someone knew that it might be something to do with the shop and in fact Sabrina Cooper herself.
Everybody in Eastbourne would have known about this and everybody would have had some connection to it somewhere along the line. So it would have affected most of the people in town.
And there would have been concerns that there appeared to be no apparent motive to it.
It is shocking to hear that, yeah. I mean, you wouldn't think that would happen to somebody who's just in the town running a shop.
There'd be uniformed police going door to door, trying to find anybody who saw or heard anything, and then looking for people to interview.
The priority of the police is to try and identify who was last in contact with Sabrina. Not necessarily because they're a suspect, but they are likely to be a relevant witness to help the police put together a timeline of what happened immediately before Sabrina's death. The police very soon afterwards were able to look at Sabrina's phone.
When the police checked Sabrina Cooper's phone, the first thing that they saw was there was a message from someone who was entered in her phone as Tony Friend.
There were 2 text messages, one asking her if she was okay, and the other saying, "On my way, see you in 10 mins."
It was obviously their prime priority to find out who this individual was.
In Eastbourne, Sussex, the niece of the famous magician Tommy Cooper, 68-year-old Sabrina Cooper, has been found murdered in the hallway of her flat.
The post-mortem examination revealed that she had sustained 4 stab wounds. One of them had been with significant enough force to have cut through a rib.
This was a frenzied attack. 4 stab wounds committed with force. And also the pathologist noticed that there were defensive injuries to Sabrina Cooper's right hand, so she was frantically trying to ward off that dreadful attack upon her. Whilst the pathologist had deemed that the causation of death was due to the stab wounds to the abdomen and chest, a really interesting factor in this case was that there was a small fracture to the larynx, and that had to be investigated as to whether in fact Sabrina Cooper had been strangled.
Whilst detectives tried to trace her mystery friend Tony, who texted Sabrina on the day she died, investigators pursue other leads.
There will be a number of golden hour investigative techniques undertaken. That will include CCTV trawl, not just gathering CCTV, but start to view CCTV to see if anybody's been to the address.
The police would approach local businesses, local residents who may have CCTV or Ring doorbell footage or anything of that nature to ensure that it is saved, so it is retained and can be downloaded for the police to use to piece together what had happened.
There was a camera looking towards Sabrina's house, and the footage of that became very important. It showed at 8:05 on the morning of the 18th, a man arriving at Sabrina's house. He was white, he was in his 60s, but it wasn't clear who that man was. Sabrina arrived home about 4 minutes later at about 8:09, having been walking her 2 small dogs.
They'd seen him entering the property with her.
It was almost an hour later that he had left those premises, and when he left those premises he was carrying a distinctive orange bag.
Given the information that the phone was telling police around Tony Friend, and Tony was expected to be there, saying, "I'll be there in 10 minutes," and a man arriving that can be seen on CCTV, it was a fair assumption there, of course, that Tony Friend and this man could be one and the same. It doesn't raise Tony Friend as a suspect, nor does it raise the man on CCTV as a suspect, but one or both, or if they're the same person, really becomes important to the inquiry to ascertain, you know, is it the same person? Is this man Tony Friend? Where is he now? And what information can be taken from him for the investigation?
On Sabrina's mobile phone, Tony is how he was saved in her contacts.
To ascertain who this number belonged to, the police obviously would have first checked with friends, associates of Sabrina Cooper, and then, of course, forensically, they would have examined the number.
If it is somebody that Sabrina knows, the chances are there'll be a social media contact there with Tony, whoever this Tony could be.
Investigators come up trumps with a Tony Sabrina had recently befriended on Facebook.
The photos on that account matched the person on CCTV seen to enter Sabrina's address on the 18th of December.
Looking at her Facebook account, he was identified as Tony King.
In the same way that the police would look at how Sabrina lived her life and who she was as a person, finding the same about Tony was of utmost importance to the investigation. Who was he? How did he live his life? What other information can he give the inquiry? Knowing everything possible about Tony would have been a priority for the investigation at that time.
Detectives discover the unassuming 60-year-old is in fact a budding internet celebrity.
Tony King had a massive social media presence. In fact, I think he had 11,000 followers.
Tony's TikTok posts on social media portray him as the life and soul of the party.
Look at it! Yay! Oh my God! Go! Yay! Love them. This is the most best female beings I've met in a long time, with banter, communication, and humour. I'm not drunk.
He was continually and regularly posting stuff on social media. And this was rather interesting because Tony King was a loner. No real close friends did he have.
He had no fixed employment, but he was a sort of man with a van around Eastbourne.
He wasn't working and was in receipt of benefits.
He had a significant alcohol and drug problem as well.
Sabrina's family did not know very much about Tony King or their mother's relationship with him. They knew that she had a friend called Tony, who she had met, they thought, when she was out walking her dogs.
And Tony King had struck up a friendship or an acquaintanceship with her. Very casual friendship, no hint of any relationship, just a friendship. It's possible that she tried to help him, that she kind of felt sorry for him and would, you know, just be friendly with him. A good woman just being kind to someone she felt was down on his luck.
It seems Tony also shares Sabrina's love of magic.
Here's your trick. But happy Halloween, and yeah, here's your treat. I've got a little lighter here, all right? And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put that in my earlug, just get that right in there, and then pull it out of my mouth. Happy Halloween.
As police continue analysing Sabrina's phone, they uncover more text messages from Tony the day before she died.
What was found was clearly a text conversation arranging to meet, and it was planned the following day to come and help Sabrina pack up her boxes prior to moving.
Tony was arranging to come round and help. He was going to help lift the boxes. As far as we can tell, she was certainly preparing for somebody to come to the flat and help her with the move, and had laid out the table for two. So she knew him well enough to invite him in and make him a cup of tea. Because of the nature of the messages, with Tony saying that he was going to be round in 10 minutes, he may well have been the last person to see her alive.
As investigators review the audio from the surveillance footage of Tony arriving, something catches their attention.
When the police looked at the CCTV, we were also able to establish that he had actually said, as he arrived, the words, "Get in, get in." The words were said with some force and some meaning. It was obvious, even listening to those words, that one could almost infer what his intention was.
What detectives find next really blows them away.
The police found the most sensational video and earth-shattering video the day before the killing. Tony King had posted a video with a chilling message.
Watch out for my next magic trick. It's going to be awesome.
In the seaside town of Eastbourne, Sussex, pensioner Sabrina Cooper has been found murdered in her flat. Police identify Tony King leaving the house on CCTV and find an ominous TikTok the influencer posts. The night before the killing.
Watch out for my next magic trick.
The police, having watched the TikTok on which Tony King said, "Watch out for my next magic trick," immediately made the connection with Sabrina Cooper owning a magic shop, and indeed her uncle being Tommy Cooper.
Having been able to identify an address, the next part obviously would be to arrest Tony King.
First thing they'd want to do is get him in for an interview. And they managed to locate him fairly quickly. He wasn't on the run.
And at 2:35 that morning, Tony King was arrested on suspicion of murdering Sabrina Cooper. He did then go on to explain, once he had been arrested, "You're having a laugh." That was his response to being arrested for murder.
I think that first initial denial, he really hadn't anything to say about it. He hadn't formulated a story. He was caught, caught on the hop. He hadn't prepared anything that he could say.
Tony King described or explained to the police that he did know Sabrina, he had had contact, but didn't understand what was happening because, in his words, he'd been smoking spliffs all evening and didn't understand what had happened to Sabrina.
He was later brought to the police station. He was interviewed. Tony King had a solicitor present. The solicitor was given the basics of the incident and given what's called pre-interview disclosure. He was being advised what the strength of the case was against him at that time.
As detectives start to interview their suspect, news of the arrest spreads across Eastbourne.
As a reporter, you're not party to a lot of what goes on behind the scenes, but we go and start knocking doors ourselves to find out what we can about him and his relationship with Sabrina. We found it very hard to find anybody who knew anything about Tony King. It wasn't difficult to find people who knew Sabrina. She was a well-known person in the community, but he really was a loner and nobody really knew anything about him. The most information we got about him was through his own social media.
It's about 1 a.m. in the morning. I've actually just woke up. I've had a wee. That was a good one.
Meanwhile, investigators begin a search of Tony King's property.
As soon as the police attended Tony King's address, that too became a crime scene.
They searched his home address and found a bloodied knife under his mattress in an orange carrier bag.
The importance of the police finding that orange bag was that it was the very same bag that they'd seen in the CCTV where the suspect had left the house 1 hour later after entering it.
They also found his coat, which had blood on it, and a number of items belonging to Sabrina Cooper in the pocket.
They found a set of keys. Those set of keys were the very same keys that Sabrina Cooper had reported to her daughter had been missing 2 weeks prior.
And in terms of Tony's clothing, there was clothing in the washing machine and in his bedroom, which again appeared to have blood on it and matched the CCTV images of the person seen leaving early that day. Finding a knife with blood on, finding clothes with blood on, all of those had huge relevance to the investigation.
The bloodied items are seized by investigators and sent off to the lab for analysis.
What the police will be looking for and hoping for is confirmation that that is Sabrina's blood. The forensic results that began to come back showed that the blood on the knife was Sabrina's blood.
In terms of major DNA findings, Sabrina's blood was found on Tony King's clothes. His DNA also had been found in her purse, which ultimately revealed, of course, that he had taken cash from Sabrina Cooper.
As scenes of crime officers continue to sweep Sabrina's home, more evidence is uncovered.
Inside Sabrina's address, there were blood marks there.
They had tested various areas within the flat, including Sabrina Cooper's handbag and a filing cabinet, and Tony King's blood was found in both of those locations.
Detectives surmise that King must have cut himself on the knife while at the scene. Back at HQ, they confront him with their incriminating evidence.
In the police interview, the police would have been trying to establish what had happened, what he accepted had happened, whether he was involved, or whether he was going to answer any questions at all. In the police interview, Tony King accepted that he had gone to Sabrina Cooper's house that morning. He accepted that he had a knife with him.
Tony King said that he'd had an altercation with another neighbour and that he had that knife on him for personal protection reasons. And at that specific time, Tony King admitted that he indeed was responsible for the killing of Sabrina Cooper.
But maintained he had no intention of stabbing her when he got there, and he didn't in fact know and couldn't explain why he had. He explained in the interview that he did stab her as they went into the property, but he didn't know why and hadn't planned it.
Effectively, that meant that the police could sharpen up their investigation. There was no need to trace other suspects. They in fact knew at that specific time that they had the right man.
Behind-the-scenes investigators also uncover Tony King's criminal history.
He had several previous convictions, but going back some years. The only notable conviction of concern was a conviction for being involved in the importation of drugs, for which he had received a sentence of 10 years and he had served half. But interestingly, he had nothing for violence. And that was something that the police thought was really, really odd when they started this investigation. Once Tony King had confessed to the killing of Sabrina Cooper, within 48 hours, Tony King appeared before the Crown Court, having first of all attended the Magistrates' Court. He was charged with an offence of murder.
He didn't look like a person of any real significance at all, which again is not uncommon. But he didn't look nervous, but maybe a bit in shock, but not particularly nervous. Didn't look particularly dangerous, but you know, you can never tell.
At the Crown Court, there was then a plea and trial preparation hearing, which is the hearing at which a defendant is expected to enter a plea. At that hearing, he entered a not guilty plea.
Lewis Power, KC, heads up Tony King's defence team.
My first impressions of Tony King were that he was a rather complicated individual. And it was clear that he had to be seen by a psychiatrist, because having accepted that he was responsible for the killing of Sabrina Cooper, the next step in the criminal process was to ascertain whether he had a psychiatric defence to the offence of murder.
In Eastbourne, Sussex, 60-year-old Tony King has been charged with the murder of 68-year-old Sabrina Cooper after confessing to stabbing her. As police and the prosecution start preparing for a trial, his barrister begins to draw up his defence.
It was our task to assess whether in fact he had any defence to murder, bearing in mind the psychiatric defences which were applicable. We had to look initially to see if there was any abnormality of mind present, so that he could avail himself of what's called the defence of diminished responsibility. It was very difficult when I first met Tony King to assess exactly what sort of an individual he was. He seemed to be very cold in terms of discussing the evidence in the case, extremely cold in terms of what had happened to Sabrina Cooper, and wasn't very excitable, nor indeed did he show any emotion. We instructed an eminent expert, Dr. Christine Tizard, a forensic consultant psychologist, to assess whether in fact there was something at play here that we could utilise in his defence at trial.
And from that point, it was a matter of setting up an assessment of Mr. King. It was during COVID, so this was done remotely by video link to the prison. When I first saw him, I suppose there was a little bit of incredulity in the back of my head, thinking, wow, is this man capable of this? But very soon into the interview, I sensed a volatileness under the surface. There was something very different and eerie about him. He approached everything as if the world owed him a favour. He came across as completely bitter about everything in his life.
He talked about his bitterness in terms of his childhood. Tony King came from a broken home. He spent a large amount of his young life in various care homes and progressed to Borstal and short periods of imprisonment.
He'd disclosed during his assessment that when he was a 9-year-old boy, he'd beaten another child senseless with a ball bearing for no apparent reason. He'd been violent to other children when he was a younger man. And his justification for that was that actually he didn't matter, nobody took him seriously.
I believe that that bitterness manifested itself into his adult life, and he remained bitter.
I've come into a lot of questions now. What do you want for Christmas, Tony? That's a big question. What do I want for Christmas? Well, this is what I want for Christmas. I want everybody to stop treating everybody like it's on their f***ing shoe.
People were all evil, they all screwed you over. His life had been so bad. It was in a sense just a rant of unfairness. I think Mr. King disliked anybody and everybody. He had a massive chip on his shoulder.
He felt that the world had turned upon him and that he hadn't had the best of life chances.
The assessment tries to pin down King's motive for Sabrina's murder.
I think Mr. King was a man that had never made it, was jealous of people, fancied himself with skills, such as if you've seen his TikTok with his guitar and with his magic.
Pull it out of my mouth.
And perhaps that was an attraction to him, that here is Sabrina with a magic shop and the connections to her uncle Tommy Cooper. And maybe it was, if you like, an opportunity almost vicariously for him to get some fame in his own view. He had a huge anger problem that he admitted to, and it would appear that he was just waiting for the right person for that anger to come out on, and it was a sense that somebody's going to get it because the world has been so unfair to me. Anybody who got into his close proximity and upset him would be at risk.
The overall conclusion of the psychologist was that Mr. King was an extremely angry individual who felt cheated at life. It didn't provide any explanation as to why any anger would be directed at Sabrina, but she was a successful woman who was happy with her family and home life, moving on to a new future.
I was very, very clear in my report that there was absolutely no case for diminished responsibility whatsoever. There was an underlying personality disorder, but Mr. King was fully aware of what he is doing.
I think I can sum it up on this basis, that her firm expert opinion was that Tony King wasn't mad, Tony King was bad.
More evidence is uncovered to support Dr. Tizard's conclusions.
When the police interrogated Tony King's mobile phone, they found an on-sent TikTok video. That video had the words, "I took a life today." In my mind, that showed that there was definite premeditation and planning involved in the killing. Tony King, on being confronted with the conclusion that there was no psychiatric defence available, had a stark choice as to whether he wished to continue to contest the trial or whether he wished to plead guilty. Almost immediately, Tony King gave instructions to us that he wanted an end to this matter and he wanted to plead guilty to the offence of murder.
He's asked to enter a plea again, and this time he changes his plea from not guilty by diminished responsibility to guilty to murder.
When Tony King appeared at his sentencing hearing, he did not utter one single word. He was cold. He looked once at the faces of the family of Sabrina Cooper. He didn't apologise once. It was chilling.
The court hears details of King's actions leading up to the murder.
Watch out for my next magic trick. It's going to be awesome.
It was clear in my view that he was trying to sensationalise what was about to happen. He wanted to be the centre of attention. He wanted to be as famous as Sabrina Cooper's uncle, the famous magician and comedian Tommy Cooper. He wanted to go down in history as someone who had committed this heinous act. Tony King had sent a message to Sabrina Cooper with an emoji saying, "I'll be round later." The emoji was that of an angel. How ironic it was that the following day he was the angel of death.
The court hears how Tony King was lying in wait outside Sabrina's home.
Having entered the address with Sabrina, no conversation happened, according to him.
And that anger and rage erupted. And unfortunately, that was meted out towards an innocent woman.
He then stabbed Sabrina to death.
An hour later, Tony King leaves with the £100 of cash he's stolen from Sabrina's purse. Then he makes his next calculating step.
Tony King sent a message to Sabrina Cooper saying, "Hope you're okay, girl, call you later, kiss." And the inference was that he was trying to suggest through that message that he didn't know that she was dead.
This, in fact, in our view, showed that the offence was premeditated and that Tony King was covering his tracks.
From Tony King's phone, there was a text message asking a friend to join him at the pub because he had £100 to spend. It shows an absolute callousness, a real narcissistic side to him that actually Sabrina didn't even matter to him.
Tony King is finally sentenced to a minimum of 23 years.
Effectively means that he wouldn't be eligible for parole until he's in his 80s. He's going to die in prison.
There was a sense that justice had been served in the end.
I could nearly feel a lump in my throat, looking across at the faces of the Cooper family, the sadness. This was the loss of their mother, their daughter, their sister. It was completely meaningless and completely tragic. It's a sensational loss, not just for her family, but for the whole community.